All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into Tamil education, and
Right.
we're going to be looking at this really fascinating book. It's called A.B. Atanapit Vemal Atin Tamaka,
Hmm.
which translates to My Red Ballpoint Pen. And this is more than just like a book review or something like that. It's like we're really trying to pull out
Yeah.
the core educational insights from this book. And there's like 10 essays in here, and they're all kind of based on the experiences and observations of this Professor S. Madasamy.
I think what's really striking is the way this book, even from the cover,
Uh-huh.
kind of sets a tone,
Mm.
you know? So you see this image of a red pen, but the shadow
Mm.
of the red pen, it's casting these images of like knives and swords even, like a gun,
Wow.
right? And it just, for me, immediately throws up this question of how teachers can even unintentionally
Yeah.
use their authority in a way that can feel really weaponized to students.
Yeah.
And especially through something as simple as grading, right?
Mm. Yeah, I see that, and even just the title essay, which is also my red ballpoint pen, kind of drives that home a little bit because
Yeah.
it starts out by
Mm.
portraying the teacher as this fearful dictator, and the author even points out that this is somebody that outside the classroom might be really quiet and reserved, but
Right.
then, like, inside the classroom completely transforms and becomes this person who loves fearful citizens.
It's so interesting how much the context really changes, like our perception of power. Right.
Totally.
The same person in one context can seem very unassuming, but then you give him a little bit of authority
Yeah.
and,
It changes everything.
yeah, absolutely. And this is where the red pen, right, becomes that symbol
Right.
of the teacher's power. So it vividly describes Professor Madassami's, early way of teaching. And he would meticulously go through every single error
Oh, wow.
in student papers and mark them in red with these just really stark comments like irrelevant answer, confusion, not clear, tall tale, numerous errors.
It's just brutal.
Yeah, imagine receiving that kind of feedback, right?
I mean, you can totally picture what the students were feeling and doing with these papers because the book describes how nobody would ever, like, share these marked up papers. They'd be
Yeah.
hidden away. They'd be torn up outside. It's a real, like, visceral image of how that feedback was landing.
Yeah, it makes you realize how much, even if the intention of the feedback is to be helpful, it can land so negatively, right?
Totally.
That it just shuts down any sort of learning.
Totally shuts down the learning process.
Yeah, and there's this one story that's really powerful
Yeah.
that kind of captures this feeling. Apparently, Professor Madassamy one day, came into class, and there was a note on his desk, and it said, "Madassamy,
Wow.
you are foolish," and went on to complain about how much he made them read.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the fact that the author included this raw feedback shows just how important, how much it really hit him, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just like brushed aside, like he really took it to heart.
Exactly. And this is, I think, where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because this, quite harsh, but honest student feedback was a real turning point for Professor Madasmi. And the book kind of points out that along with this, experience with the student feedback, he also was getting involved in teacher protests
Hmm.
and was part of the Rivoli movement, which is like this really grassroots effort to promote literacy.
Cool.
So all of this kind of contributed to this huge shift in his approach to teaching.
So instead of seeing like the answer sheet as, like a place to mark all the mistakes and find all the errors.
Right, like a hunting ground.
Yeah, exactly. He starts seeing it as like a blackboard, like a
Yeah.
place for actual teaching and positive feedback.
Yeah, it's this key shift from just focusing on the shortcomings, right? To
Yeah.
actually seeing opportunity for growth and encouraging that.
And you can even picture like the change in tone and language because the book gives some examples. It's like, excellent, wonderful, amazing, refined thought, concise essay, sweet imagination, clear writing. It's like the complete opposite of what he was writing before.
Right. It really shows you the power of positive reinforcement, right?
Ouch.
Like
Yeah.
how much that can actually affect people's, desire to learn and their engagement.
Yeah. So what happened? Like what was the impact?
So the book describes this really transformative result, right?
Yeah.
So students are no longer hiding their papers out
Right.
of shame. They're actually, now these papers are full of these positive notes. They're treated with respect. They're even, shared amongst the students in the classroom.
Wow.
The red pen kind of its powers diminished, and often it just stayed in his pocket.
Yeah.
And I think what's really fascinating about this is it shows how a simple change in approach can really change the whole dynamic of the classroom.
Absolutely. And the essay ends with this incredibly insightful quote from Professor Madisamy, which is, "Where else is there happiness like being without authority?"
That's a good one.
Right. And it makes you think about the nature of power, not just in the classroom, but in any relationship, right?
Totally. It's like there's this joy and freedom that comes from collaborating and having mutual respect rather than this kind of top-down authority.
Absolutely. And this idea of, small interactions having a really big impact continues throughout the book.
Wow.
And there's this one example that's brought up from the Tamil film Pasanga,
Oh, yeah.
which is this popular film that kind of looks at school life through the eyes of children. And there's this scene where a teacher calls a student Gauri Purusha, and it gets a laugh.
Right.
But, at first the author kind of sees this as like a minor thing.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then like really unpacks it in this essay called "Every Humiliation is a Death."
Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that things that might seem like, small and insignificant to somebody in authority can actually be really hurtful to those that don't have the power. So, calling a student with a beautiful name like Kuzali Gauri,
Yeah.
or even questioning like another student's ability to do homework while managing pigtails.
Right. These like casual offhand remarks
Yeah.
can actually have so much weight and really leave this lasting negative impression.
It's so true. And if you want to even look at that from like a broader perspective, the book even references Jonathan Kozol's book Death at an Early Age.
Oh, yeah, that's a great book.
Which is all about the impact of these negative educational experiences and how they can really contribute to, students' sense of self-worth being diminished and, ultimately hindering their development.
It's this reminder for all of us to have empathy.
Yeah.
And really try to see things from the other person's point of view.
Absolutely. And the book then expands like beyond just the teacher-student relationship and looks at the bigger picture.
Uh-huh.
And there's this one essay called Pankajam Said Stories, and it stresses how valuable these open discussions in teacher meetings can be.
Right.
And it even talks about like the importance of incorporating knowledge and skills of people who aren't like formally trained as teachers into the learning environment.
That's so interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's this idea that learning isn't just limited to, people with certain titles. Like there's so much expertise and knowledge within a community
Totally.
that can really enrich the educational experience.
Yeah, where do you see that playing out in your own life? Like where do you find these unexpected sources of
Oh, man. I mean, everywhere. Like I think about all the times I've learned something from, like a neighbor or, somebody I meet randomly on the street.
Totally.
And I think it's so powerful to be open to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the book then goes on to talk about students in government-run schools and actually really praises them for being able to speak boldly, and engage in debates confidently.
Right.
And often excel in the arts like singing and drama, and sometimes even more so than students in private institutions.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because the reasoning that the book gives for this is that the government schools sometimes allow for these students' personalities to develop more organically.
Yeah.
Like they're not under as much pressure to conform
I see.
as they might be in a private institution.
Yeah.
And they're compared to monkeys that didn't get caught in a cage.
So good.
Right, emphasizing this real value of originality and individuality.
It really makes you think about like how much environment shapes our ability to express ourselves.
Absolutely.
And like share our talent.
Yeah, there's this great quote that the book shares that really captures this. It says, "Whatever escaped being shaped, that is your vibrant essence." Right. And it really makes you think about the value of
The unscripted.
Yeah, the authentic and the unscripted.
Yeah.
And the book kind of concludes this whole point with this really powerful image. It says, "What escaped everyone's hands, what didn't get caught in anyone's hands, that's the original. The escaped monkeys. Everything designed is a Xerox."
So good. Yeah. It makes you think about all those challenges that educators face when they're trying to, foster that originality and implement new methods, especially if they're not getting like collaboration or support from their colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. And the book actually gives some really practical advice for for navigating this.
Okay.
He talks about finding and connecting with other empathetic people,
Yeah,
even if you can't find them within your workplace.
totally.
And it emphasizes how important it is to just keep reading good books,
Right.
because that can be such a source of support and inspiration.
Yeah, it's like building your own support network.
Totally. And there are even these specific book recommendations that the author highlights as very important.
Okay.
So one is Tado-chan, The Little Girl at the Window.
Oh, yeah, love that book.
Yeah, which offers this really heartwarming vision of a school that's totally child-centered and holistic.
Yeah.
And then there's Daydream by Jujupai Badheika,
Mm.
which gives you these really great insights into the dynamics of a classroom.
Cool.
Yeah, and the author clearly sees these as resources for anyone who's interested in,
Yeah.
making the learning environment better.
Absolutely. And then there's this essay, Classroom Relationships, Closeness and Distances, which really kind of delves into these often unspoken tensions that exist within a classroom.
It's interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
there's this example of this game that students would play called Possessed by a Ghost,
Mm-hmm.
which I think quite subtly shows this kind of like underlying administrative discontent that can be present
Wow.
in a school without actually being addressed directly.
Yeah, it's like all these undercurrents and unspoken dynamics really
Yeah.
influence the whole setting.
Absolutely. And I think what's really insightful here is this reframing
Yeah.
of the teacher-student relationship.
Okay.
Because the book argues that we shouldn't think of them as belonging to these, like, two separate worlds, but rather
Yeah.
as representative of two different cultures.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. And it's about trying to bridge
Yeah.
the gap between those two cultures.
And it brings up this concept of like internal classrooms.
Yeah.
Based on the dynamics that you find in a village or on the streets, which teachers who, are really observant are probably already aware of. And
Yeah.
then it identifies like a key source of conflict and indiscipline
Right.
as being the difference between the stated values of the school and the actual practices that happen.
Yeah, the disconnect, right?
Yeah, the disconnect, which is something that, students are really attuned to.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and sadly, the book points out that there's been this shift in education in general,
Yeah.
where we've moved away from nurturing, these really essential human qualities.
Hmm.
And we've become so obsessed with just achieving exam success,
Right.
at any cost. And the author kind of argues that this narrow pursuit of marks is what's causing a lot of
Yeah.
the indiscipline and stress in schools.
Yeah, it makes you think about all these like pressures in society as a whole
Totally.
that focus on performance.
Absolutely. So shifting gears a little bit,
Okay.
there's an essay called School and the Cultural Revolution
Uh-huh.
that gives this really thought-provoking look at the educational reforms that happened in China in the 1960s under Mao.
Mm.
And what's really striking is this discussion of how the education system at that time was really neglecting
Uh-huh.
practical physical labor.
Right.
And it was super focused on just learning from textbooks.
Okay.
And these reforms tried to create a more balanced system where physical labor
Mm.
was a key part of the education.
Interesting.
Right. So it's a totally different perspective on,
Totally.
what's valuable in terms of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And the book goes on to say that, these changes led to a big increase in literacy rates across China.
Hmm.
So it's really like an example of how
Absolutely.
different priorities can play out.
Yeah, and how those priorities can have a huge impact on a massive scale.
Totally. Totally.
Okay.
So bringing it back to like the day-to-day classroom,
Yeah.
there's this essay, A Place for Lies, too.
Oh, yeah, I love this one.
It's kind of funny because it talks about how teachers kind of have this reaction to
Right.
students submitting leave letters in advance that
Mhm.
say, as I am suffering from,
Right.
when it's pretty obvious that they're not actually sick.
Yeah.
They're going to a family function or
It's so
something.
relatable, right?
Totally.
It just adds this human touch to
Yes.
the everyday experience of being a teacher.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the book also addresses, something that I think a lot of teachers are concerned about, which is this idea of students not showing them respect, like not standing up when the teacher enters the room.
Yeah.
And it shares some insights from discussions in teacher training sessions.
Yeah, and I think the viewpoints that are shared by the teachers in these sessions are really interesting.
Yeah.
So, there's a teacher, Vetraslovan, and he basically says, look, you can't expect students today
Right.
to, show the same kind of respect as in, like, the Gurukula period,
Right, right.
which was this ancient Indian system of education. It's just not
Waiting for
realistic.
time.
Exactly. And then there's this teacher, Shanmugakani,
Okay.
who makes this really interesting point that teachers who themselves have low self-confidence might be more likely to feel disrespected.
Interesting.
Right. And then there's this teacher, Rajam, who says something really profound. I think it's a great takeaway. She says, "The classroom has shrunk by constantly thinking of disrespect. Let's give a little space for disrespect. Let's give, sir. Let our world be a little wider."
I love that. So powerful.
Right. It's this call for a more open, less rigid classroom.
Yeah.
Where we're not so focused on controlling every little thing.
Absolutely. So we come to this essay called Zen Classrooms, which just has these really beautiful and powerful messages from Zen philosophy.
It does.
And it talks about how, insults and negativity that are directed at us only have power
Right.
if we choose to kind of accept them. Otherwise, they go back to the sender without harming us.
Yeah, it's such an important lesson. And just dealing with any criticism in life, right?
Absolutely. And then it asks this question that's really thought-provoking for teachers, which is, why do we act like teachers who constantly pour out unwanted abuses and then collect them back daily?
It's a good one, right? It makes you think about your own communication patterns.
Yeah.
Like, how much negativity are we putting out there and then
then internalizing it.
taking it back in?
Totally, totally. And the essay goes on to talk about the influence of the educator, Paulo Freire, who said that dialogues are better than speeches.
It's so true.
Right. And it stresses how important reciprocal conversation is.
Absolutely. And what I also love about this essay is that it really acknowledges that teachers are human.
They are.
Right. And that even the best teachers sometimes,
lose their temper.
Yeah, or do things that they regret later.
Yeah, and it gives some really practical advice for managing anger.
Yeah.
Really be able to navigate those peak moments.
It's so important, right? Like, we all need these coping mechanisms for when we're,
when we're at our worst.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So then we get to this this essay, Hope Sown on the Streets, which describes the experiences of the Irivoli movement.
Yeah, this is powerful.
Which, if you remember, is that literacy movement that really took education outside of the classroom. The book does such a good job of describing, the freedom that people felt learning in these, open community spaces and how the curriculum wasn't limited to textbooks.
And the joy, right?
Yeah.
Like classrooms filled with song and laughter and
Totally.
And this real sense of hope for change, right?
Yeah, this idea of learning being this, vibrant community activity.
Exactly. There's this beautiful quote from the writer Vela Ramamurthy that I think captures this so beautifully. And he says, "The joy of a finger that had a line growing wings."
What a beautiful way to put it.
It really shows you that potential that's unlocked, right?
Yeah, totally, yeah. And the book concludes with this really powerful quote that's attributed to Mao Zedong, which is, "This world is ours, this nation is ours, this society is ours. If we don't speak, who else will? If we don't act, who else will act for us?" And it really kind of encapsulates the book's message about, agency and responsibility.
It's that call to action.
Totally.
Right, to realize that we have the power to make a difference.
Yeah, and ultimately the book stresses that it was Professor Madasami's own kind of, deep spirit of self-inquiry, constantly questioning, constantly looking for better ways that really drove his work. And, the book ends with this really nice thought, which is that the most meaningful reward we can give him is to try to create these free and violence-free classrooms.
Beautiful.
And it ends with the question, what greater reward can we give him than this?
So wrapping up this deep dive into my red ballpoint pen, we've seen this incredible journey of Professor S. Madasami.
Right.
From this very traditional authority-focused teacher to someone who really embraced empathy and encouraging his students and respecting them. And I think it shows us how important the teacher's approach is.
Absolutely.
And how even small interactions can have a huge impact.
Totally.
and how valuable it is to encourage different perspectives and really nurture each student's individual potential.
And for you, our listener, who wants to gain knowledge efficiently and effectively without being overwhelmed,
Right.
this exploration has given us like so many insights into, creating these really positive, human-centered learning experiences. It doesn't matter if you're a student or an educator or just somebody who's like interested in how we learn and grow.
Totally. And I think what's really important to remember is that these principles, they extend far beyond the classroom, right?
Absolutely.
These ideas of communication and power, they're relevant to all of us.
Yeah, and it leads to this final thought that we want you to consider, which is, looking at Professor Madasumi's, really impactful growth as an educator,
Right.
what deeply ingrained beliefs about learning and authority, or even just like how we interact with each other, do we need to kind of re-examine to make more positive environments for everyone? Something to think about.
It is something to think about.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.